American fast food retail giant Kentucky Fried Chicken has said it cannot share the quality standards that Kenyans wishing to supply it with potatoes must meet due to proprietary restrictions. Now, it's the latest blow for Kenyan farmers who are lining up to bid for the lucrative deal. The food chain said in a response to media inquiries that it does not disclose such information. Now, the company seemed to backtrack from an earlier statement made by its CEO for the East Africa region, Jasquis Thenusin, who said there was an opportunity to source the potatoes from local suppliers that meet the global KFC quality and safety specifications in the near future. So what's going on? Joining us to talk further is Kathambi Kaaria, who is a climate change sustainability expert and CEO of the Creide Group. Good morning to you, Kathambi. Thank you so much for joining us. So what do you make of this development? Was KFC just paying lip service to Kenyan potato farmers just to handle the backlash?
I think it's too early to tell whether this is an exercise in crisis communication or whether this is something that will result into real value for farmers. But I think the thing to remember is that the way things stand at the moment, this sort of engagement can only happen with very few farmers who have the capacity to KFC requires and to also add value, because KFC also requires products that have undergone significant value addition. And so I think the broader and more important conversation we need to be having is how we make the ecosystem work for millions of smallholder farmers who rely on agriculture for their livelihoods.
Great stuff. And speaking of which, you shared a very informative thread on your Twitter page where you talked about dealing with KFC years ago when they came into the Kenyan market, and you explained why they have those standards for their potatoes. So can you share your findings from that thread?
Well, it was a very casual conversation that happened close to, I think, over 10 years ago, almost. But it was sufficient for me to understand sort of the limitations that many African smallholder farmers face when they try to engage with global markets. And the issues back then were pretty much the same issues that we are discussing now around standardization, around quality control, around traceability solutions, but also a sort of value chain that can support end-to-end value addition and for farmers actually to have a congent supplier relationship with KFC.
So what needs to happen at the local level to make, for instance, track and trace of farm produce a reality? Can it happen? Is it possible?
Yes, of course it's possible. Everything is possible. The track and trace solution itself, sort of the technology of the traceability technology, is really not a challenge for the continent. Africa's young people are leading the technology on innovation, and so the talent is there, the innovation is there, the smarts are there. But these solutions are only useful if they can be deployed in an ecosystem that's ready for to sort of uptake those solutions. And so the question is not even so much about the track and trace technologies and supporting that capability, but whether the entire agricultural value chain is optimized for farmers to participate in global markets. And again, back to traceability, I think the other thing I would add is that the idea of tracking and tracing sort of the movement of goods, of produce through the agricultural value chain is more than, even beyond the KFC conversation. Because even when you think about sustainable farming, for example, the conversations we are having about sustainable farming and produce that is climate and people compatible, traceability is still a big aspect of that. We need to sort of think about environmental aspects of the food supply chain. We need to think about the social aspects of the food supply chain. And so, like I mentioned, previously in previous conversation, I think what needs to happen is that the larger ecosystem, we need sector agriculture well regulated, that is well governed, and that actually rewards farmers for their participation in agriculture. And obviously that means a lot of collaboration amongst all the stakeholders, from government, the private sector, the farmers themselves, in order to deliver the much needed agricultural transformation.
Great. I'm glad you mentioned the government. I want to ask you, because KFC imports potatoes from Egypt and I think South Africa, so the government's doing, something's working there. Could the Kenyan government have forced KFC to take supply from local farmers, or would that have been an overreach?
Well, can KFC source from local farmers? Yes, they can and they should. But I think there is also the other part of that equation, which is that demand indeed that the private sector creates shared value in the communities and the countries they operate in. This concept of creating shared value economically and socially can only happen relative to cost. And so if it's too prohibitive for the private sector to engage with the local markets, and then this is what happens, because they start sort of seeking alternatives that are cheaper and more affordable, and that makes sense to sort of their profit-making objective. And so what needs to happen, I think, beyond the idea of compelling the private sector, is that the government and the public sector and other stakeholders, including financial institutions and nonprofits, also need to meet the private sector halfway in terms of creating an enabling environment that allows the private sector to succeed, that de-risks sectors so that it makes it a congent cost-benefit conversation for the private sector to have. And so, of course, I mean, compelling KFC to buy from farmers is an easy way out. But I think there's more to be done in terms of creating an environment that actually attracts private sector investments.
Great stuff. Kathambi Kaaria, CEO, Creide Group, also climate change sustainability expert. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about the latest in the potato saga in KFC and Kenyan farmers. Thank you so much for your time.